It has been a few days since the £14 million Bayesian super yacht sunk off the Sicilian capital of Palermo in Italy. Hopes are fading as rescuers are scrambling to find the 6 people still missing from the 22 that were on board when the 183-foot yacht sunk. Still missing on board includes millionaire Mike Lynch, his 18-year-old daughter Hannah Lynch, chairman of Morgan Stanley Jonathan Bloomer and his wife Judy, New York lawyer Chris Morvillo and his jeweller wife Nada. Joining me now to discuss the ongoing situation and the complexities of the search is oceanographer Dr Simon Boxall. Simon, thanks so much for your time today. This latest update is that an investigation has been launched into whether the hatches of the yacht were left open when the vessel was caught in this storm. Can you walk me through what this means in this latest update?
It's highly likely they were open, and that wasn't an error necessarily. I think people are assuming that the storm had been brewing for a long time. This was a very short, sharp, almost like a thunderstorm. Well, it was a thunderstorm that hit, and the sort of tornado or the water spout that hit was incredibly intensive, but it would have whipped up from nowhere in about 20 minutes. So there was no warning of this. Up until that point, the seas were calm. It was a very hot evening. The sea temperatures at the moment in that part of the Mediterranean are 3.5 degrees warmer than they should be for August. So we are seeing a big difference in climate in that area. So it would have been quite natural for the hatches to be open. It was a relatively calm evening. We've seen that in the rescues as well, that it's relatively calm waters. So this would have come out of nowhere. This would have been sort of a freak accident that came out of the blue. And obviously the hatches being open means that the boat is no longer watertight, and that's the big problem.
If this did happen in that, the very short period of the storm coming, is it too late for staff to be able to round up the passengers?
Absolutely. Bear in mind, most people were in sleep. What's interesting is that there was the woman with her baby who sort of was one of the first rescued, and she was actually on deck at the time. I think she couldn't sleep; it was so hot, so she was wandering around on deck. From the sort of the tales that are being told at the moment, and she was washed over by the storm when it hit. And so there would have been very little time to predict this happening, to do anything about it. And also bear in mind that during the day, they could have seen the storm coming in the distance. But there would have been a night watch. The night watch wouldn't have seen the storm coming. It's very difficult to see it in the dark, and it would have whipped up very quickly. Very difficult to, people are saying, well, why didn't they get people on deck into life jackets? This all happened in probably a couple of minutes, and the actual ship itself sank, we think, in less than 60 seconds. So it was a very quick and violent effect.
How did those 15 people on board, the 12 crew and the 3 passengers, manage to escape and get rescued, but the 6 others weren't as lucky?
I think it depends very much on where they were at the time. If they were in cabins near the surface, they could have made it to the outside quite quickly. If they were sort of cabins deeper down or in deep sleep, then it would be more difficult to do that. There would have been people on watch, there would have been people sort of on deck. So there would have been other people that wouldn't have been trapped and were washed over the side. Now, because the water is warm, because there were many boats nearby to do the rescues, then those people were saved quite quickly. In normal circumstances, you stay with the boat if there's a difficulty, because being washed over shore, over the side, in the middle of the ocean, particularly if it's cold, is the last thing you want. But in this case, it probably saved their lives.
You mentioned this before, Simon, but those reports have indicated that the ship did sink in just 1 minute. How can a super yacht go down that quickly? Is that common?
Completely unheard of. I don't know of any other circumstances like this. The only time you actually see big ships sink is with things like rogue waves, where they snap a supertanker in half. But even this sort of ship would survive that sort of event. I think what happened and what seems to be happening at the moment is that there's stories about the fact that the yacht is fitted with a retractable keel. The keel is the thing that keeps it balanced. And if it had been sort of pottering around the ports under engine rather than sail, there's a fair chance the crew would have decided to lift the keel because it could go into shallower water. If the keel was still up when the tornado hit, the waterspout hit, the mast is huge. It's 78 meters tall into the sky, huge windage, and it would have been pushed over. And if there was no counterbalance with the keel down, then it would have capsized very easily. With the hatches open, it would have filled with water, and that probably explains why it sank so fast. We will know once the Divers get more information once they speak to the crew. Most of the crew are okay. So I think this will come to light over the next few days.
So do you think it's when that does come to light, Simon, do you think it's more likely that the investigation will prove that there was actually something wrong with the super yacht?
Not necessarily, no. I think, incidents happen at sea, and I think there's a sort of an assumption that someone must be blamed, or there must be some fault.
Mm.
Nature is very violent, and sometimes you cannot battle against nature, even with the most advanced technology and some of the safest yachts and things. So I think in this case, it was a series of unlucky events. Um, and I think this is what's led to this terrible incident.
Mm. Divers are reportedly struggling to be able to actually reach the yacht. It's sitting on the seabed now, and they're trying to move through that furniture that's on board to be able to search for the missing 6 people. How tough do you think this diving mission is?
Incredibly tough because the clock is ticking. There is and I hasten to add, a very faint chance, sort of
Mm.
lottery win type chance that one of the people on board, has survived and are trapped in an air pocket, which is why there is some urgency to the search. I think it's highly unlikely before people get their hopes up. But the problem is that 50 meters, it's too deep for standard sort of what we call recreational diving. So it's a question of using specialist gas and air, but at the same time, divers can only spend a short period of time down there, 12 minutes typically. Otherwise, they start suffering from the bends. So very short sort of journeys down there. You can imagine taking your living room or your bedroom, filling it with water, turning it upside down and shaking it, and imagine what happens to all that furniture, all the stuff inside. And they're trying to get through that. It's a very dangerous occupation, a very dangerous task to do that. So they've got to be careful so we don't lose more lives in the rescue attempt.
Mm. And it's a different situation to what we've seen with other capsized boats, Simon, because this is a yacht that sunk, only about 200 metres from the shore, as opposed to when we see these situations, it's usually right out in the ocean. Is there a difference between what the situation that divers are using now as opposed to when you're right out in the middle of the ocean?
Middle of the ocean, you can't use divers. If you're down at, anything really over, this is about the limit for safe diving, 100 meters. But once you start getting to sort of 2 or 3 kilometers, you're not using people anymore. You're using remotely operated vehicles. And so it's much more difficult. It's specialist equipment that takes a while to get there. So in the open ocean, either the yacht is stuck at the surface, in which case there is a chance of rescue. Tony Bullimore in the Southern Ocean a few years ago is a good example of that, in the Vendée race. He was rescued from his upturned yacht. But once the yacht sinks in deep water, it becomes difficult. The big, I suppose, thing about here is that those people who did survive were rescued very quickly with minimal injuries. And because it's so close to shore, there are a lot of boats. You've got Coast Guard close by. The water is relatively shallow, plus the fact it's warm water as well. So all those things aid the search. It's just the fact that you can't get divers down there, and it's a bit of a mess on the seabed.
Mm. Just finally, Simon, the one body of the chef has been recovered, and then they're still looking for the other 6. You mentioned that it's probably unlikely that they are found alive, but how do you see the next few days playing out?
I think over the next few days, I saw a rumor that they might be trying to get a saturation dive team in, which means they can stay down longer. It's a higher risk. But eventually, I think they'll search very carefully through the yacht to try and recover any people down there. I hate to say it, but bodies down there. And then eventually, I think they will try to recover the yacht. It's not too difficult to do at those depths. A combination of heavy lifting equipment and airbags will be able to bring it to the surface, and that's when the sort of accident investigation really begins.
Dr. Simon Boxall, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.